where do you find God? Almost sounds like a loaded question, doesn't it? I mean, if God was someone you could find, wouldn't everyone be out searching? Well, rather than looking for something elusive, like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, I reckon it's more about learning to recognise the way God is already present to us in our everyday lives. I'm Lizzie Oakes, and this is Where Do You Find God? My guest today is Jeff Crabtree, all the way from Sydney, Australia. Now, Jeff is a very talented man. He's a speaker, an author, a researcher, a filmmaker, a multi-award winning songwriter, a music producer, and probably many other things. Great to have you here today, Jeff.
Thanks, Lizzie. It's lovely to be here.
You've done so many things. I know you've done a whole bunch of research and all sorts of things, wearing many different hats. Is there one thing out of all those things that makes your heart sing the most?
No, I think my problem is if I was to just do one of them, I'd be bored.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that seems, because music is endlessly fascinating for me, yet at the same time there's only 12 semitones, there's only 12 notes. So I think this is going to sound like heresy to a musician, but I feel like if I was only working in music, I'd be bored with that.
Yeah. You want to have something to write about, right?
I think I just need a little bits of everything.
I completely relate. I'm a person very similar, actually.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, in the Bible, going straight to it, and we were talking off air earlier, and I heard you mention that this is one of your favourite scriptures.
It is.
Acts chapter 17, verse 27 says, God intended that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So my question to you today, Jeff, is where do you find God?
Everywhere. So I'm answering this for me, but I'm also speaking to church culture. So churches have their own cultures and their ethos that are sort of like little subcultures, if you like, from the larger sets of cultures. And, if you go to one church culture, you only find God in the act of the bread and the wafer, the act of communion. Or another subculture, you only find God in the moment of prayer. If you go to another subculture, you only find God in the act of ecstatic worship. And I've sort of attending churches and for many years now, and I've attended all different kinds of church cultures. And it struck me as odd one time when I noticed that in the contemporary church charismatic culture, the people who were sort of felt a prophetic utterance. They felt that God was speaking to them, that they needed to then speak it out. This only ever happened in church. And I thought, that can't be right. And so I began to examine the concept. I began to really question that concept. Not the concept itself, but the culture. Yeah. Which made me think about all of these other cultures. And of course, ultimately, you've got to recognise that my PhD, my doctorate, is essentially a piece of research in cultural studies. So I now have 2 degrees in cultural studies. So I guess I'm not the person that you want to be talking to if you want to insist that your kind of culture is the right one, because I'm a student of cultures in one sense. So I feel like all of those cultures are reaching for a moment of experience, a moment of recognition or realization, or a moment of contact with the divine. And it is the human experience to reach for the divine, whether it's within the Christian faith or not. So my answer is everywhere, because having I no longer attend that kind of a church community. I attend another kind of church community, but I've found like Ignatius Loyola, who gave birth to the Jesuit movement, that you can find God anywhere. You can find God everywhere if only you look. And so he gave birth to an entire movement. And I'll say this not as a Catholic, by the way, not as a Roman Catholic. But he gave birth to a movement that we now refer to as the Jesuits. And part of their spiritual practice is the contemplation and in that contemplation finding the voice of God. And so I have from time to time conducted that kind of a personal spiritual practice, and I've found God in the most unlikely of places. So everywhere, anywhere. Sometimes I've been yearning to hear from him and heard nothing, and then later on would realise that I was hearing, feeling. And it's because we live so much inside of our heads, right? So it's you don't know. Sometimes you feel like, is that God or am I talking to myself?
Yeah, for sure.
So I felt like in my journey of faith, which is quite a long journey. It's not my whole life, but it's quite a long journey. And I started out as an atheist, and I came to faith at the age of around about 17. So, and now 10 years later, here I am. So in that long journey of faith, it's been there's been really it's sort of a quest. To find something of the depth of God and to understand more, and then you realise it's not about understanding, but it's about relationship and engagement, and then you kind of have that mystery of how do you engage, or how do you engage with somebody who is invisible, and then you realise that if you want to see God, all you need to do is read the red letters, read the scripture, read the New Testament scriptures about Jesus, because Jesus says, I'm not doing anything unless that I don't see God doing. So when you see me act, you're seeing the Father.
Yeah.
So then I realised that Jesus himself is like a gateway.
He is. His
behaviour and his words are like a gateway. And so when he talks about I'm the way, the truth and the life, that's the way that he's talking about. I am. What he means is you're seeing this, I'm like a gate.
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
I think that scripture emerges from another scripture, which is, I think, often poorly translated. There's the narrow gate that leads to life and then the broad gate that leads to destruction. I think people have this impression, like I certainly did, that you are on a path and then there's a little gate to the side of the path with this narrow staircase that climbs up.
Yeah.
What he's actually talking about, a better translation of that passage is the narrow gate that leads to life, but then there's the path to destruction is an open field.
Right.
Which means you can go in any direction. You can go in any direction to find a destructive end. But the narrow gate is Jesus. I am that way. So when he talks about the narrow gate, he's talking about that me. I'm not me, Jeff, me, Jesus. I'm talking about I'm that way, I'm that truth, I'm that life. And this is the way you come to the fullness of your own life, and this is the way you come to understand the divine ultimately. Does that make sense? Does that put it all together? Because we are actually really using the English language to try and describe or codify experiences which at their best are indescribable and for which language is inadequate. So it's unsurprising that in the end we start to say it's like this or it's like that, or I'm reminded of God this way, or we resort to poetry.
Yeah.
So I found God in music. I found God in music that I've made, in music that other people have made. I've had some profound experiences of finding God in music that I was making with friends collaboratively. And that was a series of music called Prayer Works. We recorded these things live in the studio. Sadly, the music's out of print, but it's coming back. We're resurrecting it. We're bringing it back. Such profound experiences of God that in the making of one of those, the guitarist we finished a take, one of these tracks, and the guitarist burst into tears or was crying, and he went outside and cried, and like good Australian men, we just ignored him. For a while. And then one of us went out and talked to him and said, what was going on there? And he said, I could hear music, but I couldn't play it. But I remember distinct memories of playing this music in the studio with these brothers, it's a collaborative set of friendships. It was extraordinary. Of feeling like we'd gone places that I couldn't describe, I couldn't identify. And I found myself moved like St. Ignatius, like Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit movement. I found myself finding God in every day, in contemplating even things as simple as a cup of coffee, or contemplating even the earth, the dirt, or sitting contemplating. I live near the ocean, so contemplating the beach and the sea and the sky. I found myself captivated. It's almost as if God is always wanting to make himself known, almost as if God is wanting to touch my soul. I just have to pay attention. And so, and kind of suspend my problem-solving brain.
Yeah. Can I just ask this God that you meet in all these places, what's he like?
Oh, warm, friendly, loving, caring, non-judgmental, and always nothing's a problem. Nothing's a problem. Like everything's working out, and it's always like it's like being held in and embraced by an older brother, I guess, for me, who just is going, everything's okay. Maybe that's a symptom of the fact that I spend a lot of my life worrying and anxious. But I've always felt, even when I was in Christian leadership, I've always felt that God comes to us in ways that we recognise, and maybe that's where I should probably come to as a kind of the more conclusive thought. When people hear this and they go, "Oh, you find God everywhere," gee, thanks very much. It's really helpful for me. I find God because I think I truly believe that God knows the language that we speak. Because what is the language of God?
The language of our heart? Is that what you mean?
Well, our total language, not just our verbal language, but our non-verbal language and the language of our thoughts. He knows how to communicate with us all in the same way that, on that first day of Pentecost, all the disciples came stumbling out in the street speaking all these different languages, and everybody around them understood, even though that they knew these people didn't speak these languages natively. It's as if God knows how to speak to us all. It's only we're really prepared to listen, I guess. And so I've always felt that God has this capacity to come to every human in a way that they will recognise. And so that's me. I think that's my kind of landing place on this very important question, which is a big question, Lizzie. You're asking a big question.
I am.
I'm sure you're getting big answers.
Getting great answers, and I really appreciate you answering the question today, Jeff Crabtree. Thank you for being on Where Do You Find God?
It's a pleasure.
If you'd like to listen again, tune into Star each Wednesday morning at 10:30, or listen and subscribe via your favourite podcast app and give us a review so others can find us.